The fluorescent lights in the ER waiting room had been flickering for 3 weeks, and facilities still hadn't fixed them. I'd put in the maintenance request myself, twice, because the strobe effect gave me a headache by hour 4 of every shift, and I was always there for at least 10. I'm a nurse. Have been for going on 3 years now, which sounds more impressive than it is when you consider. I spent the first 6 months of that time convinced I'd made a terrible mistake. Hawthorne Community Hospital isn't glamorous. It's a mid-sized nonprofit in South Baltimore, the kind of place that treats everyone regardless of ability to pay and operates on a budget that makes our supply closet look like a college dorm room during move-out week. We run out of the good trauma scissors at least twice a month. The vending machine in the staff lounge has been broken since before I started. There's a crack in the ceiling of exam room 4 that maintenance swears they'll get to, right after the lights. But I love it here. That's the part that surprises people. My college roommate is a pharmaceutical rep, making twice my salary, and she looks at me like I'm a puzzle she can't solve whenever I tell her I'm not looking for something better. This is something better, I want to tell her. Just not in the way she means. My name is Wren. Wren Callahan. No relation to the Irish Callagans with the extra H and the chip on their shoulder about it. I'm 26. I grew up in Towson. I have my mother's stubbornness and my father's inability to leave a problem unsolved. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment 12 minutes from the hospital that costs me $1,100 a month, which I know because I recalculate my rent-to-income ratio every time I open my bank app and regret it immediately. The night everything changed was a Wednesday in late October. I was 40 minutes into a double shift, already running on gas station coffee and the tail end of a granola bar I'd found in my jacket pocket, when the paramedics brought him in. Trauma bay. That's all dispatch said. Blunt force, vitals unstable, lost consciousness at the scene. He'd been in a car accident on I-83. An SUV ran a red light and hit the passenger side of a black sedan at around 45 miles per hour. The driver of the sedan was fine. The man in the back seat was not. He'd been thrown sideways into the door despite the seatbelt, and by the time the ambulance reached us, he had a serious concussion, 2 cracked ribs, and a shoulder that looked like something I didn't want to think about too hard. He also had no ID on him. No wallet, no phone, nothing. His suit was expensive. I noticed that only because Dr. Okafor mentioned it while cutting it off him. In the dry way she mentioned everything, like a nature documentary narrator who'd given up on finding wonder in the world. Nice fabric, she said. Someone's going to be upset about that. We stabilized him. That's the job. You don't ask questions in the trauma bay. You just work, and you trust the team around you. And you try not to think about how still someone looks when they're unconscious, because that way lies panic, and panic doesn't help anybody. He was transferred to the ICU 2 hours later. Concussion, the cracked ribs, and a shoulder injury that required surgery. Not immediately life-threatening, but not nothing, either. I followed up because I was the admitting nurse, and because we still didn't have a name for him, and the hospital needed a name for the paperwork. His room was quiet when I came in. He was awake, barely, in that post-sedation way where someone's eyes are open, but the lights are on low. He turned his head when he heard me come in, and I registered 2 things at once. That he was younger than I'd initially thought, maybe mid-30s, and that he was looking at me with an expression that suggested he had no idea where he was but was working very hard to figure it out. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice low. "You're at Hawthorne Community. You were in a car accident. Do you know what day it is?" He blinked, thought about it in a way that was visibly effortful. "Wednesday," he said finally. His voice was rougher than I expected. "It was Wednesday. Good, still Wednesday. Do you know your name?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Mercer," he said. I know it's Mercer. The rest is." He stopped, pressed his uninjured hand against the side of his head. "I can't." "That's okay," I said, because the concussion was significant and this wasn't unusual. "You don't have to. We'll figure it out. Is there anything I can get you right now?" He looked at me. Really looked in the way people don't usually look at nurses in the ICU, which is either because they're too out of it to focus, or because we've become furniture in the hospital landscape, functional and easy to overlook. "Water," he said. "Please." Such a small thing. I'd gotten that request 1,000 times. But there was something in the way he said it. Not demanding, not distracted, just honest. That made me notice him in a way I hadn't when he was unconscious on the trauma table. I got him the water. I updated his chart. I went back to my other patients and told myself I wasn't thinking about him any more than I thought about any patient, which was approximately true. His name turned out to be Grant Mercer. We found out 2 days later when the hospital's social worker ran his description through the system, and a woman named Patricia, his executive assistant, it turned out, called the general inquiry line in a panic because her boss had missed 4 meetings and wasn't answering his phone. What she told us when she arrived, a sharp-faced woman in her late 50s, who looked like she'd been running on Fury and black tea for 2 days, was that Grant Mercer was the founder and CEO of Mercer Capital Group, a private equity firm with offices in Baltimore, New York, and Chicago. His net worth, according to a Forbes article she pulled up on her phone and showed me without my asking, was somewhere north of $800 million. I looked at the article, looked at the photo of the man in the tailored suit at some charity gala, looked at the man in room 412 who had asked me very politely for water. He doesn't remember who he is yet, I told her carefully. The concussion caused some retrograde amnesia. It should resolve as he recovers, but right now he's operating on fragments. Patricia looked at me with an expression I would come to recognize as her default setting, assessing, efficient, and faintly suspicious of anything she couldn't quantify. He needs to remember soon, she said. There are decisions that require him. I understand, I said, but he's also got 2 cracked ribs, a surgically repaired shoulder, and a brain that took a serious hit. Decisions can wait a few days. She looked at me like she wasn't used to being told that decisions could wait. I had a feeling that was true. When I went back to Grant's room that afternoon, he was sitting up slightly, looking out the window at the gray October sky, with the focused expression of someone trying to read a language they half remember. Patricia was here, I said, checking his vitals. I know. A pause. She told me who I am. How does that feel? He considered the question seriously, which I appreciated. Most people would deflect. Surreal, he said. Like being handed a file about someone and being told it's yours. I know the facts. I just don't feel them yet. That's normal, I told him. Memory is layered. Procedural things come back first. Episodic memory takes longer. What's procedural? Skills. Languages. How to tie your shoes. The stuff your body knows even when your brain is buffering. Something almost like a smile crossed his face, the first time I'd seen him smile. It changed his expression in a way that was difficult to look at directly, like trying to watch an eclipse. Buffering, he repeated. That's a good word for it. I thought so. I went to leave and he said quietly, "Thank you for the water, the first night." I turned back. He was looking at me with something careful in his expression, something that felt like attention in a way most people didn't pay. "That's the job," I said. "I know," he said, "but you said you're at Hawthorne Community, and not you're at the hospital. Like the name mattered, like it was a place worth being at." I didn't have a good answer for that. Because he was right, I did say it that way, always, because to me it did matter. I just hadn't expected anyone to notice. The next 9 days were strange in ways I'm still not entirely sure how to explain. Grant's memory came back in pieces, which is how it works. He'd wake up and suddenly know something. The name of the city where he grew up, the fact that he preferred his coffee black, the layout of his office. He'd share these things with a kind of wonder that felt private, like watching someone rediscover their own handwriting. I wasn't his primary nurse the whole time. Assignments rotate, and the ICU has its own team, but I checked in more than was strictly necessary, and I told myself it was because the case was interesting from a neurological standpoint. I kept telling myself that for about 4 days before I gave up, and admitted that I liked talking to him. He was sharp, even still recovering. He asked good questions. He listened to the answers. When I mentioned, offhand, that Hawthorne was a non-profit and that we operated on tight margins, he said, "That must be frustrating when the care clearly isn't tight." "It's the nature of it," I said. "It doesn't have to be," he said, and something in his tone suggested he was already thinking about something. I didn't ask what. I should have asked what. On day 8, a woman arrived at the hospital who made every nurse at the reception desk stand up a little straighter. Her name was Serena Hargrove, and she was, Patricia informed me later, with the air of someone providing a public service, Grant's ex-girlfriend of 2 years prior. Serena wore the kind of clothes that didn't have visible brands because they didn't need to. She had the cheekbones of someone who had always had options. She swept into Grant's room while I was finishing notes in the hallway, and I heard her voice, warm, practiced, perfectly calibrated, saying, "God, Grant, I've been sick with worry." I went back to my notes. I stayed at my notes for a very professional amount of time. When I came in an hour later to check his chart, she was still there, perched on the edge of the visitor chair with her hand on his forearm, and his expression was the very specific look of someone who is being attentive out of politeness. "Wren," he said when he saw me. Not Nurse Callahan. My name, which he'd started using somewhere around day 4. "Good timing, I can come back." "No," he said, quickly. Then, with more composure, "No, it's fine. Serena was just leaving." Serena left with exactly the grace of someone who was not, in fact, done. When she was gone, Grant was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She's not wrong that she came to see how I am. But her version of how I am is mostly relevant to how certain business arrangements might be affected." "You remembered that?" I said. "Some things come back with the person," he said. "Procedural." I laughed before I could help it. He smiled. That full one, not the partial. And something shifted in the room's temperature in a way I filed away and did not think about. He was discharged on a Friday 3 days later. Patricia organized everything with the efficiency of a military operation. Private car, home care nurses lined up, a physical therapist scheduled to start Monday. Grant walked out of the hospital under his own power, shoulder in a sling, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone whose ribs still reminded him they existed. He stopped at the nurse's station on his way out. I was behind it, doing discharge paperwork on a different patient, and I looked up when Patricia cleared her throat pointedly. "Mr. Mercer wanted to say goodbye," she said. She had the tone of someone who found this charming and unnecessary in equal measure. He was looking at me. "Thank you," he said, "for all of it, not just the water this time, full recovery," I said. "That's what we want to see." "I know." He paused. "Hawthorne does good work, we try." He nodded once, then left. Patricia gave me one last unreadable look and followed. I went back to the paperwork and told myself the slight feeling of deflation was just end of double shift exhaustion. I kept telling myself that on and off for the next 2 weeks. Then everything started to fall apart. The rumors started small, the way they always do in hospitals. A mention in a staff meeting about operational reviews. A consultant spotted on the administrative floor. Somebody's friend in accounting who heard something they probably shouldn't have. By the time the official announcement came, we all knew enough to brace for it. Mercer Capital Group had acquired a 30% stake in Hawthorne Community Hospital's parent organization, a regional nonprofit health network called Chesapeake Health. The announcement was 4 paragraphs of polished language that said, essentially, that a strategic partner had come in to help us optimize, which, in my experience, is a word that usually means someone is about to lose something. The town hall meeting 3 days later didn't help. The new liaison from Mercer Capital, a man named Dermot who smiled too much and kept saying pathway forward, presented a slide deck about realignment opportunities that included, buried in the middle like they hoped nobody would read that far, a reference to service consolidation in lower margin units. Our ED was a lower margin unit. So was the community clinic on the east side that we'd been running for free for uninsured patients for 11 years. Dr. Okafor sat next to me in that meeting and said nothing. She didn't have to. I knew what she was thinking because I was thinking it too. We treated 17,000 patients in our ED last year. 40% of them were on Medicaid or had no insurance at all. If we consolidated, they would go, where? The bigger hospitals downtown that were already over capacity? Home? I walked out of that meeting with a feeling in my chest like something clenched. I told myself I didn't know for certain what Grant Mercer knew about this. Told myself that the private equity world worked in ways I didn't fully understand. That decisions got made at levels far removed from the person whose name was on the building. Told myself it would be unfair to assume. I told myself all of that, and then I sat in my car in the parking garage and cried a little, because Hawthorne was the thing that had saved me just as much as I'd helped save other people, and the idea of it being gutted for someone's portfolio optimization felt like a particular kind of wrong I didn't have a word for yet. The call came on a Tuesday evening. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Is this Wren Callahan? The voice was one I recognized immediately, and something in my chest did something complicated. Mr. Mercer, I said. A pause. You're the only person who still calls me that. He sounded almost amused. I was hoping you'd be willing to meet with me. Not officially. Personally. I'd like to talk to you about Hawthorne. I should have said no. I had very good reasons to say no. I was a floor nurse, not an administrator. I had no power in this, and meeting privately with the man whose company had just bought a stake in my hospital was, professionally speaking, somewhere between complicated and inadvisable. Fine, I said, but somewhere neutral. Not a restaurant where I'll feel underdressed the whole time. Silence. Then quietly, there's a coffee shop on Calvert Street. Foster's. 7 o'clock? Foster's was a neighborhood place with mismatched chairs and chalkboard menu and coffee that cost $3.50 for a large. I'd been going there since nursing school. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in the corner with his collar open and his jacket over the chair back, looking like someone trying very hard to look like he wasn't a billionaire. He was approximately halfway successful. You found it, I said. Patricia was horrified, he said. She wanted to book somewhere with a private dining room, and you didn't. I spent 9 days in a hospital. I wanted somewhere that felt like somewhere people actually went. I sat down. He'd already ordered coffee. The server, a kid named Marco who'd been there 3 years and always remembered my order, brought mine without me asking. Grant watched that exchange with an expression I couldn't read. You come here a lot, he said. It's my Foster's, I said. Every nurse has a Foster's. He smiled. Real one. God, it was still difficult to look at. I need you to know something, he said, shifting into a different register, more serious, about the Chesapeake acquisition. I need you to know I didn't sign off on the ED closure proposal. I kept my expression neutral. How much did you know? A pause that answered the question somewhat. Not enough, he said. That's the honest answer, and I know it's not a good one. I knew we were acquiring a stake in a health network. I knew there were loss-generating units that my partners wanted to address. I did not know that addressing them meant eliminating the community clinic and gutting the emergency department that serves 40% uninsured patients. His jaw tightened. I found out 4 days ago. The same day I found out what we actually treat in that ED. How'd you find out? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a piece of paper, folded. He slid it across the table. I unfolded it. It was a printed list. Diagnoses from our ED over the last 12 months. Sepsis caught early in patients who hadn't seen a doctor in years. Pediatric asthma managed because parents couldn't afford a primary care copay. Overdose reversals. Diabetic crises. The things we caught because we were there and we were free. My assistant pulled it, he said. She knows how to find things. I looked up. Why did you need to see me specifically? He looked at me steadily. Because I've been thinking about something since the hospital, he said. About the fact that you said Hawthorne community like it meant something. About the way you talked about the margin problem. Not as something to apologize for, but as a structural issue worth solving. He paused. I think I've been trusting the wrong people to tell me what we're acquiring when we buy into healthcare. People who speak the language of returns without understanding what it is they're actually returning on. What does that have to do with me? I want to understand what Hawthorne actually is, he said. Not the financial model, the real thing. And I think you're the only person who'll tell me the truth about it without trying to manage me. I sat with that for a moment. That's a lot to ask, I said. Of a floor nurse you met while you had amnesia. I know. The optics are also not great. Your firm just bought into my hospital, and now we're meeting privately. I know that too. I looked at him. He was holding very still in the way he did when he was listening hard, the same way he'd sat in that hospital room, while his memory came back in fragments. I'll tell you about Hawthorne, I said finally, but you have to actually listen. Not listen in the way where you're already deciding what to do while I'm still talking. I know how to listen, he said. You taught me, actually. You told me memory was layered and to let the procedural come first. I've been applying that to everything since. I didn't know what to do with that, so I picked up my coffee. Fine, I said. Then let me tell you about a woman named Dolores. Dolores was 63 and uninsured, and had come into our ED 3 times in 1 year for hypertensive crises. because she couldn't afford the blood pressure medication that would have prevented all 3 visits. On her 3rd admission, I'd spent 45 minutes on the phone with a patient assistance program and gotten her medication covered for the next year. She hadn't been back since she sent a card at Christmas that I had taped to my locker. I told him about Dolores. Then I told him about the teenage boy who'd come in with a broken arm he'd been ignoring for a week because his mother was afraid of the bill. Then about the shelter 2 blocks east that sent us their overflow on cold nights, and the understanding we had with them that went nowhere in the official record but kept people alive. Grant listened, not the performance of listening, really listened. He asked questions that proved it. By the time I'd finished the 2nd cup of coffee, I'd been talking for 2 hours. "That's Hawthorne," I said. He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to fix this," he said. Not loudly, quietly, like a promise made to himself that I was incidentally present for. Not with a press release, actually fix it. That means buying out my partner's stakes in Chesapeake so the decisions go through me, not a committee. It means restructuring the endowment so the community units are funded independently of the margin requirements. It means, he stopped. Ran a hand through his hair. It means taking on a fight with people I've done business with for 15 years who will not be happy about it. Why would you do that? He looked at me directly. Because it's the right thing. That's not a business answer. No, he said. It's not. I walked home from Foster's at 9:15, with October cold cutting through my jacket and something unsteady happening in my chest that I wasn't ready to examine closely. The next 3 months were the kind of busy that doesn't leave room for thinking too hard about anything except the next immediate problem. Grant moved forward with buying out his partner's positions in Chesapeake, which cost him somewhere in the 9 figures, and generated exactly the kind of friction he'd predicted. 3 people who'd worked with him for over a decade stopped taking his calls. There was an unpleasant article in a financial trade publication about Mercer Capital's strategic pivot that was clearly sourced by someone who felt burned. He came to Hawthorne twice during that period to meet with administration, and both times he stopped at the nurse's station. Both times he didn't stay long. Both times I found myself watching the elevator for 20 minutes afterward, before I admitted what I was doing and made myself stop. We met at Foster's 3 more times, officially to discuss the restructuring plan. I gave him notes on what the nursing staff actually needed, better staffing ratios, the supply shortages, the maintenance backlog. He took notes in a small notebook with his left hand because his right shoulder was still in recovery, writing in a cramped, tilted script that somehow said a lot about him. On the 4th Foster's meeting, neither of us had an agenda item that justified it. We both knew that. Neither of us said so. He'd started calling me Callahan somewhere around the 2nd meeting, in the easy way of someone who'd decided on a name and wasn't asking permission about it, which should have annoyed me and somehow didn't. My PT cleared me for full movement. He said that 4th night, rotating his right shoulder experimentally. Thought you'd want to know, since you spent a significant amount of time worrying about that shoulder in a professional capacity. Professionally, I agreed. Very professionally. He looked at me. The corner of his mouth did something. Callahan, he said, I need to tell you something. I wrapped my hands around my mug. Okay, the night I was discharged, when I stopped at the nurse's station, Patricia had the car waiting, and I had 6 messages from 3 different time zones, and I told her to give me 5 minutes one. I remember. I used 4 of them trying to figure out what to say to you. A beat. I used the 5th standing there, convincing myself I was overthinking it, and you were just the nurse who'd been kind to me, and I should say thank you and leave. I made myself hold very still. I've thought about that 4.5 minutes more times than is reasonable, he said. In the interest of not repeating the mistake of wasting time on the wrong thing, I wanted to say that this isn't about the hospital. I know, I said. He looked up. I've known for about 6 weeks, I said. I've just been waiting to see if you were going to say it. Something shifted in his expression. Something I'd seen pieces of that first morning when he'd noticed how I'd said Hawthorne's name, fully realized now, and completely unguarded. Waiting, he said. I'm a nurse. We're good at waiting. He reached across the table, and his hand covered mine on the mug, and neither of us said anything for a moment because we didn't need to. Then he said, I don't know how to do this in a way that's uncomplicated. I'm aware that's a significant understatement. I'm not looking for uncomplicated, I said. I'm looking for true. Things were still complicated, of course. The hospital world found out about us. It always finds out. And there were raised eyebrows and pointed questions at a staff meeting that I answered directly, and without apology, because I'd learned somewhere around year 2 of nursing that apologizing for things you haven't done wrong is a habit worth breaking. Patricia gave me a look the first time I attended a Chesapeake board meeting with Grant that might generously be described as cautious assessment, and I gave her one back that I hoped communicated that I wasn't going anywhere. And we reached a kind of détente that eventually became something closer to respect. There was a night, 4 months in, when a man arrived at Hawthorne's ED, who I later found out had ties to a property deal from Grant's past. A development in Fells Point, where some people had not been treated fairly and had long memories about it. He didn't come to threaten me directly. He came to deliver a message, that certain people felt Grant had made an enemy out of them, and that enemies had ways of reminding you what you owed. I called Grant from the parking lot, hands unsteady on the phone. He was there in 22 minutes. When he walked in, I saw the thing I'd only glimpsed in him before, the absolute, controlled stillness of someone who had learned, somewhere, what it was to operate under genuine threat. He wasn't afraid. He was calculating. It was, honestly, a little terrifying. "Are you all right?" was the first thing he said, and the way he said it put the calculation away and replaced it with something else entirely. "I'm fine." They just talked. "Grant?" I stopped. "How many of those are there? People from the past with something to settle." He was quiet for a long moment. "Some," he said. "I built this company in ways I'd do differently now. There were deals that were legal that I'm not proud of. People who ended up on the wrong side of decisions I made too easily." He looked at me. "I've spent the last several years trying to undo what I can. But you can't undo everything." I thought about what I'd been told in nursing school about the difference between cure and care, that not everything can be fixed, but everything can be tended to. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "About tonight, specifically?" "I'm going to talk to my lawyers and put this where it can actually be addressed, legally, on the record." He said it with a deliberateness that told me he was choosing the harder road on purpose, which is going to be uncomfortable and expensive and probably result in some things about my past becoming public that I'd rather not have public. But it's the right answer. He looked at me again. "It keeps happening that you're standing there when I decide to do the right thing. I don't think that's accidental." "That's very nice," I said. "But I want to be clear that I'm not your conscience." "No," he said. "You're something more than that." A pause. "You're the person who showed me what a place looks like when it's built for the right reasons." I'd been building things for years, Callahan, and I didn't actually know what that felt like until I watched you do it. There are moments in your life you know you're going to come back to. I knew, standing in that hospital parking lot with October cold arriving again, because somehow it had been a full year, that this was one of them. The legal process took the better part of 8 months and included depositions and a settlement and a considerable amount of press that Grant handled with a directness I respected, even when it made for difficult reading. He didn't minimize. He didn't spin. He said what had happened, what it had cost the people involved, and what he was doing about it. It cost him professionally in the short term. Some relationships didn't survive it, but the ones that did were built on something more durable. Hawthorne's community clinic expanded the spring after. New hours, a second location in a neighborhood that had been asking for it for years. The ED got a staffing bump that reduced our ratio in ways that made me feel, for the first time, like I wasn't constantly making impossible triage decisions about my own time. The vending machine in the staff lounge was replaced. I put in a new maintenance request about the crack in exam room 4. This time it got fixed. The afternoon Grant came to see the clinic expansion opening. I was working a regular shift and didn't know he was planning to come. He appeared at the nurse's station in a jacket and no tie, looking the way he'd looked in Foster's the first time, like someone trying to take up less space than he could. "You could have told me you were coming," I said. "You would have told me not to. I would have told you to come after 3 when the morning rush cleared." He smiled, real one, still difficult to look at directly. I'd stopped trying to do it directly some time ago and just let it happen. I just wanted to see it, he said. What it actually looks like when it's working. I walked with him through the new clinic, the waiting area with actual comfortable chairs, the exam rooms with adequate lighting, the pediatrics corner with things on the walls that kids had drawn and we'd laminated. He was quiet the whole way through, the way he'd been quiet that first morning in the hospital room, taking things in. At the end, he stopped. This is what you were describing, he said. When you told me about Hawthorne. This is what it's supposed to be, I said. We got here eventually. He turned and looked at me, and the expression on his face was the most uncalculated thing I'd ever seen from someone who spent his professional life calculating everything. I love you, he said. Just that. No preamble, no hedge, no careful construction. I'd known it. In the way you know things before they're said out loud. The slow accumulation of evidence that your brain processes before your heart catches up. I know, I said. I love you too. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear with a gentleness that was completely at odds with everything the financial press had ever written about him, and I thought, this is the part they never get right, in all the stories about people like him, the gentleness that doesn't make the news. We walked back through the clinic together. His hand found mine somewhere around the pediatrics corner, and neither of us remarked on it. At the nurse's station, Marco from Foster's was standing in line for intake paperwork. His cousin had called him for a ride and ended up needing an X-ray. He saw us and raised an eyebrow. You two know each other, he said. Grant looked at me. I looked at Grant. He was a patient, I said. She was my nurse, Grant said. Marco looked at our hands, still linked, and made a face that suggested we were not as subtle as we thought we were, and went back to the intake form. That was probably fair. My mother, when I told her the whole story sometime later over the phone, was quiet for a moment and then said, You know, most nurses meet interesting people at work. You took it a little further than most. The job requires it, I told her. She laughed. I did too. Outside the clinic window, a kid was chasing pigeons in the parking lot with magnificent and pointless determination. A grandmother in the waiting area was knitting something orange. 2 residents I'd taught 6 months ago were having an argument about a treatment plan, with the fierce certainty of people who were about to be wrong together. Everything ordinary. Everything exactly right. I'd come to Hawthorne 3 years ago with my mother's stubbornness and my father's inability to leave a problem unsolved, and I'd found a place that needed both. I hadn't known that what I was also doing was leaving a light on, in a room I didn't know I was in, for someone who'd stopped being able to find his way back to anything real. He'd found it, eventually. We both had. That's the thing about caring for people in places built for it. You can't always predict who ends up being healed.